Now we're going to take you from 1820 to 1822, continuing this lecture. And we're going to look at the written word arriving in Hawaii. So it was Keopuolani who first welcomed the missionaries and whose children were first taught to read and write. And the first missionaries arrived in 1820 from the ABCFM. However, it's kind of an irony thinking about that the missionaries came to bring change in reading and writing to the Hawaiian Islands, but it wasn't their own coming here because they thought they wanted to come here. It was actually for Hawaiians that brought the missionaries here. And this is the amazing story, actually one of my favorite stories, of Henry Opukaha'ia, who grows up on Hawaii Island during the warring period with Kamehameha, sees complete atrocities happen, and ends up jumping on a ship and stowing away. And he ends up in New England where he meets these missionaries, tells them about Hawaii, and they come back because of him. On this ship, as he stowed away, he met three other Hawaiians that were there, and they were all buddies, and they sort of flourished while they were in New England, believe it or not. And Henry Opukaha'ia became this kind of rock star in a way during the early 1800s. While he was there, he created a writing system, a phonetic alphabet for Hawaiian, and he wanted people to he wanted the missionaries to understand his language, the Hawaiian language primarily, and that's kind of what happened. So this is from a book about his life, his memoirs and stuff, and these are our four gentlemen there, you can see. But they come to Hawaii, and in 1820, the missionaries, the ABCFM, which is the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions, and the missionaries are largely misunderstood in Hawaiian history. I think a lot is laid at their doorstep, and they're sort of blamed for a lot of things, from disease to ruining the language and taking away culture and all this sort of stuff, which I think is kind of nonsense, if I'm honest. I think the first wave of missionaries, I'll say this, I think had good intentions. Maybe the later groups that came sort of got land hungry and power hungry and maybe took advantage of things. And I think that's kind of where everybody gets lumped into one sort of bag. But in reality, I think the first wave of missionaries that came in 1820 and 1822 had very good intentions. I really, truly believe that. And they sort of comment on what their endeavors were, which was not to take away or steal the language or abolish the Hawaiian language, but they wanted to learn the Hawaiian language, and they did. And they actively learned it and spoke it as their first primary method of communication. But they also wanted to teach Native Hawaiians to read and write in Hawaiian. And thirdly, to teach Native Hawaiians to read and write in English. So they wanted both sort of to be there, okay? And they used word lists that were collected from years past. So in order to sort of commit the Hawaiian language to writing for the first time, which happens in 1822, they used word lists, and this is an example of word lists from different ships that called to port in the Hawaiian Islands, from British nationalities to Spanish, Peruvian, Russians, French, and you can see the number of words collected on each visit, ranging from 1778 all the way to 1819. So all these ships collected word lists, and they were sort of, and this is kind of an example of Anderson's Hawaiian word list, and you can kind of see, if you Olala Hawaii or you speak Hawaiian, you can kind of look at it, and you'll probably look at it and go, oh my gosh, it looks so different from what I learned. But if you're a linguist, this actually means a lot, because you can sort of hear how different ears heard the sounds and how they were transcribed. And so this is kind of something cool to look at if you want to take the time to sort of figure it out or ask me questions about it. But realistically, 1822, the first printing press was brought to the Hawaiian Islands, and from there, what is really, really sort of noteworthy is the fact that there was like an explosion of literature in the Hawaiian Islands after 1834 until 1900 easily, because Hawaii became one of the most literate places on the planet, and not in English, primarily in Hawaiian. And this is a quote I found from a book that I was reading called The Role of Newspapers in Hawaii. And if you read this quote really quickly, it's the sheer number is astonishing. Even though many holdings cannot be found, making an exact count impossible, there's evidence of more than 1,000 separately titled papers in at least 9 different languages. For our small Hawaiian Islands, small population, to have that much prolific publishing and our language sort of in there is absolutely phenomenal to note that. Um, and so building a nation from 1840 to 1843, also kind of going back to this, I really want to note really quickly that many of these holdings that we have were still, even now in this day and age, in this year, we're digitizing and going through, and there's so much information in there that's just, I mean, amazingly hohonu, as we say, just like so deep and so we'll be figuring these out for generations to come. So next years we went through 1819, 20, 22. We're going to go through 1840 and 1843 to kind of round things out to build a nation. And they come in sections between 1825 and 1839, 1840 and 1843. Kind of what happens after the kapu system is that there needs to be laws. People need to understand their roles and relationships in this changing society, because you have more and more people entering the islands that do not understand local ways, that come off sailing ships and whaling ships and are just, running amok all over Lahaina and Honolulu. So laws need to be in place, and this is how it sort of progresses from unification. 1825, rights and responsibilities. First laws created. Kahumanu passes her laws that she creates. Kamehameha, Kekumu Kanawai in our first constitution. Okay, but realistically, laws, penal codes, and those sorts of things were created in the very early years of 1829 to 1826, 29, and in the 1830s, really to sort of have people understand. It was giving to lawmaking to define more clearly the rights and responsibilities of both citizens and foreigners. It was the spirit of the law in action and creation. And Kahumanu and Kauikeaoli, Kamehameha III, took the lead in this. And that's kind of how it happened. And in 1827, along with her Council of Chiefs, she creates our first penal codes. And penal codes are basically penalties. So you do something wrong, here's the penalty, okay? And these are basically just reactionary measures, right? In order for a nation to have a substantive set of laws, it needs a constitution. And that was a modern marvel back then. A lot of nations were dictatorships, so on and so forth, but having a constitutional base, even a constitutional monarchy, which we're going to end up with, is sort of the basis where laws come from. You can't just have penal codes and all this sort of stuff without a fundamental foundation under which it all sort of exists. And that's the beauty of 1840 and 1843, which is the Constitution and becoming a nation. But what is important is the first laws and penalties that were created. This is what they were created for. And if you read down this list, right, there's sort of egregious things. I mean, it's not like stealing your neighbor's taro plant or something, right? These are laws for very, very heinous crimes, things that are ruining our society today, but they're very, very, very sort of serious stuff, right? And you can see why our ali'i at the time were sort of really worried about what was happening, because these are very, very sort of seditious things. In 1832, however, Kahumanu passes away. She was in charge of the Hawaiian kingdom effectively after Kamehameha, because she was the Kuhina Nui. She had rank, and she was actually the premier, while Kauikeaoli was still not of legal age. And so when she passes away, he basically gets the reins. He gets the keys to the car. He's the full ali'i nui in charge of it all. And she had gained a lot of power. And things were changing in the islands because she was one of the last pre-kapu ruling ali'i. The newer generation of ali'i growing up didn't remember the kapu system, so they had a different mindset, and that was very, very important to realize. And she ruled and governed as regent for 13 years. But in these difficult times, Hawaii needed a strong leader, and they found it in Kamehameha's son, Kauikeaoli, who was Kamehameha III. He was crowned Kamehameha III. And he was very, very instrumental under his rule to bring our first constitution, make the Hawaiian Islands a nation in 1843, and also introduce our second constitution, which was revised in 1852. So here's kind of what it happens. And this is the beginning of our constitution in 1839. We call it Kekumu Kanawai, which is a preamble basically to the constitution. And it was there to protect Hawaiian interests, and it was there to protect property rights, so on and so forth. And our Constitution of 1840 is Hawaii's first constitution. It's actually monumental in the history of the world because it's a milestone in Hawaiian history, and I like to say the true meaning of aloha. Because if you just think about the fact that Hawaii created a constitution, you might think, okay, it's just a piece of paper, it's a constitution, blah, 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 blah. But think about what it actually meant from the Ali'i point of view. Because Hawaii was transitioning from an absolute monarchy to a constitutional monarchy. So those might just be, hyperbolic terms, but if you break down what this means, it's absolutely mind-blowing because absolute monarchy means the king, right? Kamehameha III had absolute rule. He had 100% authority. Anything he says is law. Anything he does or wants happens. He's an absolute monarch. However, after he creates the Constitution, now you have another layer. You have the king, the Constitution, and the people. So now, effectively, Kauikeaoli's power is limited from 100% to X percent. So he's actually giving up his own power so that other people can have and exercise and share in the balance of power. That has really never happened in world history without a revolution. I mean, you think to all the revolutions that has happened in world history, people have literally fought against governments to take power and own it. And our monarch gave it up so that his people, the Hawaiian nation, can have power and share in it. And that's the true meaning of aloha, is doing that selfless act. And for him, we owe him everything for that. So on the verge of a constitution, this is the main thing about our constitution that you really need to sort of sear into your brain. What a constitution does. What is a constitution? And it's very easy. Here's the simplest definition I've learned, so I pass it on to people. It divides, assigns, and regulates power. That's it. Divides, assigns, regulates power. It divides it up, right? Divide it up from one person to different authorities, assigns it in what proportions, and regulates it, how it flows between different parties and offices in power. And if you notice here, I'm just going to go quickly through some of the aspects of our first constitution. And you can kind of see it's very sort of religious in nature. And it talks about who has rights. This is important because it tells you rights are given to every chief of correct behavior. And product is not to those who act in violation of the laws. So, and God has established government for the purpose of peace, making laws for the nations to enact for the protection for all subjects. And that's a super, super important part about this Constitution. So the above sentiments are hereby published for the purpose of protecting alike both people and chiefs. So it's not just about the chiefs and the ruling power, but it's about subjects and people, and the power, divides, assigns, and regulates power. This is telling you how it goes through society so that everybody benefits from the law. And that is a super, super fundamental reason why the 1840 Constitution is so, so important. Yeah. So kind of going back to these ideas here, this is kind of where we're going to leave this lecture in 1840 with our first Constitution. And this is going to be the foundation for becoming a Hawaiian nation. We looked at international law, and this kind of is like a guidepost to the 5 elements, right? Our first Constitution, but without writing, the introduction of the writing system, the fall of the coupled with this Ainoa system, it all doesn't make sense, and it can't happen. So tied together, this historical period is so very important for our Hawaiian nation.